Hello beautiful people and welcome to another project. In this one I'll be working on this display slash bureau cabinet, which seemed like a pretty straightforward project, but it wasn't. This lock seems to be broken. I'll take it out and see if I can fix it. If not, I might need to replace it with another one. And this key is really messed up. It's cracked in multiple places. Looks like this is some sort of shelf. Was probably resting on here. There are huge gaps in the back panels. This looks like wallpaper. I think this might be the most work I put in a single project. And it didn't even look that bad until I started taking it apart and realized how much work there was to do. This lock was broken and it was quite unusual, so I wasn't sure if I would be able to find a replacement, so I decided to try and fix it myself. So these are all oak boards, and even though they're not particularly straight and there's lots of issues with the joints, and I think some of them will need to be re-glued, there are huge gaps in the back, and I think I'll need to remove all the boards and try to put them back together without any gaps. Don't know what this is. I'll need to take pretty much the whole thing apart. Because this is solid wood, I think there is a lot that can be done. So we'll see what I can do with it. I realized that the easiest way to work on this project was to take it completely apart. Or almost completely. These are all flat surfaces, so I think I'm gonna leave the glass in for now, and I think I'll manage to clean it as it is. There is this lock on the other door. I decided to take the back off because there were huge gaps between those boards, and I thought maybe I could just reuse them, and it looked okay from the distance, but they were in a terrible condition, lots of cracks, and I decided to replace them. This isn't particularly even, is it? I think someone forgot to cut this off. Oh well. First of all, the bottoms of these legs are rotten, so they need to be cut off. But there's like this loose piece of wood. And it's the same on the other side. There is a bit of this leg missing, and I also don't like them. I think they're gonna go. Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise. Those boards were very dry and cracked in many places, and because this piece was old and a bit wobbly, I just wanted to be stable and more rigid, so that's why I decided to replace them. Most of this cabinet was put together with huge nails, so it took a lot of work to take it apart. These are some huge nails. This is why I had to cut them. Anyhow, one out, one more to go. That is a massive nail. I'm making a score line so I know exactly where to put this shelf back. And I will need to re-glue it because it's broken in half. I'll need to cut the nails because there's no other way I can get it out. This is a clean break, so it should be pretty much invisible once glued. Which actually didn't matter because I decided to cover it with veneer just because the shelf was made of pine and most of the cabinet was oak, so it was a mismatch. I don't know what it is with this top, but it's definitely not original, or I think there used to be something on top of it. I don't know what it is, but I don't believe that this is what it looked like because it's just ugly and it makes no sense. No one would make it out of a piece of pine where the doors and the sides and everything else is made of oak. This isn't sanded, it isn't even, and there are huge gaps everywhere. So I don't know what the deal with this is, but I need to do something about it because it can't be left like this. It's just ugly. Someone put a piece of oak in front of this board to make it look like the rest of it. So I just don't believe that if they actually made this effort to do this, they would leave this nasty scratched piece of pine as the top. It just makes no sense. But before I could apply the veneer, I had to remove this wallpaper or whatever it was, and I used my steamer to get it softer and easier to take it off. This is one of the shelves, and as you can see, it's not very straight. There's not much I can do about it unless I put it through my planer, but then it will be much thinner. So I did plane it, but only to make it visually flat, if you know what I mean, because I didn't want to make it too thin. This is oxalic acid. I've sanded this, but it's got that old wood look, so I'm going to apply some oxalic acid to bleach it. I'm not crazy about this pine, so I think I'm going to cover this with a piece of veneer so it actually matches the front, which is oak. That took way longer than I wish it did, but once I was finally done with it, I took a short break to play with Hugo. I was actually going to delete this piece of the footage, but I just want you to see what sort of project this was. And I think I managed to cut it down to just under 30 minutes, but I had 5.5 hours of footage. This is gonna make my work so much easier. Nice and uniform as far as the color. I'm gonna bleach it a little bit, do some sanding. The most important thing is it's not as wonky as it was. This is the little door. This is definitely not straight, so I think I'm gonna put this through the planer as well. These pieces are not even like flush with each other. I don't know if you can see that. So that will take a lot of sanding. So I did plane it a little bit just to make it a bit more straight, and then I sanded it. This is literally like 3 millimeters taller than this. I'm gonna try and make this even, and I think I'm gonna try and do this by hand with this block plane. Because those end pieces are too big, I need to trim them down and then I need to recreate the same shape so it's continued throughout the whole door. I'm sure you noticed that in this video I sped up a lot of the footage just because if I didn't, you would probably fall asleep. Not sure if you can see this, but this is very uneven. This is actually bigger than it's supposed to be, so it sticks out on the other side as well. So I'm going to shape this to match this shape. So basically need to bring this down a little bit. I've got this cool little sander and I think it's gonna be perfect for this application. This was a lot of work, but I managed to make all these decorative bits in line. There's still gaps, but this is not because the wood is warped. It just wasn't done properly, so I'll just need to fill this in because there's nothing I can do about it. And I will need to glue this together because it's cracked. But I'm gonna apply some oxalic acid first to bleach this and make sure that this is all nice uniform color before I do anything else with it. I'm very happy with what it looks like right now. So this is the following day after one coat of oxalic acid. I'm very happy with the result. I'm not going to apply anymore. If you do use oxalic acid, remember to rinse it with water. I'm going to fill in all the gaps because this doesn't look right. Do a little bit of more sanding and Bob's your uncle. Here's what I'm thinking. Because the shelves are made of pine, I think I'm going to apply this oak veneer to them, and I have just enough to do it. Before I do anything with it, there is a missing knot, so I'm going to plug the hole with these plugs. I'm going to apply this contact adhesive. That method is super simple. You literally just spray both surfaces with the contact adhesive, wait about 10 minutes and then just apply the veneer to whatever surface you want to put it on. And I'm making sure that it's all adhered properly. Cut off the excess. You can do a little bit of sanding or use a router like I'm doing here, and Bob's your uncle. Because of the squeeze out, I know that there's glue between those pieces, so it's all good. Even though this is a bit tricky to inject the glue, because of this, I know that there is enough. A little bit of sanding right now will close this little gap completely, and you won't be able to see it. I thought about it, and I think it's going to be less noticeable if I actually put the edge banding on the edges and make it look exactly the same than if I leave it this way. So that's what I'm gonna do. And actually the grain pattern on this edge banding is more similar to the original one than this one, so I think this is actually a good idea. The process is very similar, but instead of adhesive you use an iron to melt the adhesive that's on the veneer already, and the other steps are exactly the same. This is the shelving thing that was inside the display cabinet, and I think I'm gonna take it apart so it's easier to clean this. I'm going to apply some oxalic acid because, as you can see, the wood is quite dark and it's got that old wood look. As I mentioned, this video is about 30 minutes out of 5.5 hours of footage, so as you can imagine, there was much more work that I had to do, and that's only what was recorded. As you're watching me scrape this, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone for watching my videos, commenting and liking, because that allows me to do what I do, and I want you to know that I really appreciate it. And as always, a special shout out to all the channel members, you guys are the best. If anyone would like to support what I do, you can find all the links in the description. There's a link to my Buy Me a Coffee, my Amazon wishlist link, or you can just hit the super thanks button. Thank you.
2,000 years later.
When I was finally done scraping the windows, I applied oxalic acid. I'm not going to remove these screws, but I'll try to clean them a little bit. And then I did some more scraping. This top is so bad, there's no amount of sanding that's gonna fix this. One way to deal with this would be to put this through a planer, but what I'm thinking is that I'll cover this with something. And it will cover this end grain as well, because it just isn't pretty, not to mention this huge nail. Yeah. This isn't great. These gaps are really big and I don't like them. I don't want to fill them in with wood filler because it's going to be a different texture and there won't be any grain. So I'm going to insert some pieces of oak veneer, and this way I'll have continuous grain. And that's exactly what I did. I basically stuck pieces of veneer wherever it was possible and then used wood filler for all the little gaps that I couldn't fill with veneer. I'm using grayish wood filler because I had a very specific color in mind for the final result, but that didn't quite work out, as you will see in a minute. I'm pretty happy with this. It definitely looks much better than before. And I like that it's actually wood, even if the grain isn't exactly the same. Much better than wood filler. Okay, it's time to deal with this. There's so many things wrong with this top and this construction that I don't even know where to start. There's this big nail sticking out, so obviously it's not doing anything. There's a huge gap. This is not attached properly. This is an old chisel, so I use it for things like this. I'll see if I can pull this nail out. Not sure if you can see the problem, but these two pieces are very close to each other, but these are not. I don't want to change the overall dimensions because it will really mess up everything else. Someone used nails to connect these two pieces and you can kind of see them because they cover them with wood filler, and I don't want any more visible signs of anything being done to these two pieces because this is the visible side of this cabinet. So this is what I'm gonna do to make it invisible but also give it some extra strength. I did try to describe this, but I think it's just easier if you watch me do it. So this way I've been able to close the gap, and I'll need to shave off a little piece of this just to make it flush. And yes, if you measure it, it's probably not exactly straight, but it does look straight, and this is the best I could do. Because this isn't broken, this should be a very clean repair, and you should not be able to see that anything has been done to it. And I'm going to use this to push it in with a clamp. And after a little bit of sanding, you can hardly see there was anything done to the side. I also used some super glue and activator to stop this knot from moving. As I said, because I screwed those pieces together, you can see that there's a little bit of that side piece that needs shaving off, and that's what I'm doing here. There's a big gap and I tried to nail this together, but it's not really moving. I think the pieces are warped a little bit, so I'm going to insert this oak edge bending to close the gap. I'll see if I can fit two of them, and these have glue on them already, so I'm going to melt the glue, and that's how I'm going to attach these. And because this gap was only wide enough for the veneer in some places, I also used wood filler for all the tiny gaps that were left. And when I was done with that, I cut off those legs properly, just to make sure they were not sticking out. I'm going to sand the bottom because I'm a professional. I've just found 4 screws over here, and I think this confirms my theory that there used to be something attached to the top, because this is the top. They serve no purpose at the moment. I did so much sanding on this project that even watching it back as I'm editing is painful.
A few moments later.
When I was finally done with sanding, I used my hand planer to shave off a little bit from the top and see how flat I could actually get it. So I was planning to put a thick piece of board on top and cover this whole thing, but after sanding this and planing, I think I can just apply a piece of veneer and this should be good enough because it looks pretty flat. I think I'm just going to apply a piece of veneer and then another strip on top of it over the full length, and this way I'll be able to close this gap. And just to make it clear, I'm talking about this front-facing piece. I put some veneer in all the larger gaps, but for the rest of it I'm going to use 2-part epoxy putty. That's because after planing and sanding there were still some areas with like dips and holes and all sorts of things. I don't have a piece of veneer that's long enough to cover the top, and I don't want to use a different type of veneer, so I'm going to use this wide edge bending and see if I can do it this way. This has the most similar grain pattern to the sides of this cabinet, so that's why I've decided to use this. The question is how well I can stitch it together. And the answer is pretty well. There's some stains on the bottom, and obviously no one's gonna see them, but I know they're there, and it will annoy me if I don't do this, because I'm a professional. So this is the replacement I'm gonna use for the back, and these are tongue and groove boards, and it's basically the same material but new. And that will make it look pretty, but also make it rigid, give it some strength, and make it last for another 50 years or so. And what's most important, no more gaps. I had to cut one of the pieces to make sure it actually fit, and when I was done with that, I used lots of brass nails to attach the boards because I'm fancy AF. And I also used my track saw to cut off all the ends to make sure they were the same length. And now it's looking nice and tidy. As always, I use my laser packer to burn my logo to the back of this cabinet, and I was ready for the final steps. So, I decided to try something I've never done before, which is ammonia fuming. The reason you would want to do it is because ammonia reacts with the tannins in the wood and changes the color of it. and it works really well with oak, but I wasn't sure if it would work on something like this, which is old, and it's also made with all sorts of things like solid oak, veneer, and pine. And it did work as expected. It didn't really do much for the pine, but I knew that would happen. But as you can see, the top was a bit patchy because the plastic was touching it in some places. So I decided to suspend the plastic over the piece so it wouldn't touch it, and tried again. And this time it worked. However, I think this works best on new wood, not something you want to restore. And because there were pieces of pine and some veneer that actually came from two different trees, it did not all look the same. So I was slightly disappointed and decided to use some stain on it as well, just to make sure it was all even and uniform as far as the color. If you ever want to do it, you need to know what sort of wood you're working with, because different species of wood have different amount of tannins in them and will react to ammonia differently. I used medium oak spirit-based stain and I applied it with my sprayer just to make sure I had a nice even coverage, especially because I used pine boards on the back of this cabinet, and pine is notorious for being patchy when you try to stain it. One thing you can do to mitigate uneven staining on pine, you can use wood conditioner before you stain. I like using spirit-based stains because they dry quickly and you can apply finish on the same day. There were some marks from the wood filler that someone used to cover the original nails, so I used touch-up markers to blend them in with the color I used. It was nice and sunny day, so after a few hours when everything was dry, I used satin spray lacquer and gave it 5 coats. I also decided on the lacquer rather than hard wax oil because this dries much quicker, and I already spent so much time on this project and just wanted to get the video out to you guys. I've painted the hinges because they were steel, so I want these to match the rest of the hardware. And these screws look awful, so I'm going to use this rust remover. Let's see if this thing is brass. I might need to paint this. It's copper. It's quite annoying when they mix and match hardware and some bits are brass and some bits are copper. I'll need to paint this to match the other bits. I've just cleaned every single link of this chain individually on this side, and now I just need to do the other side. Yay!
A few moments later.
I don't think I've ever done anything like this. It took absolutely forever, but it looks great. I'm going to paint these so they match the color of the chain. So I've cleaned this up. This key is messed up, and I found this one, which is very similar. I made a little cut in here to kind of match the same pattern, and it looks like it works. Wow, this is a mess. After taking it apart, I cleaned every single piece and I polished it, and one of these things had to be bent a little bit because it was preventing the lock from actually working. Because I'm a professional. So this is the new key, and this is the lock after my repair. Looks like it's working. When I was done with the lock, I applied some wax to the bottom and I put on the new legs. And now it was finally time to put the whole thing back together. I'm also installing these, two of them, one on each side, just to make it easier so you don't need to lock it every time you close the door. hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more content like this if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.